Hello, if you're tuning into this episode, congratulations on surviving a very tough week 15 that was filled with numerous injuries to some pretty big profile names, or you're just a hardcore IDP gen like us. Either way, we say welcome in. I'm Jeff Pomazal, and welcome to the IDP After Show Week 16 preview episode. Joining me this week is no stranger to the show, and we welcome back Pete Nova, who is blowing up the Twitter space, and he also does some pretty great work over at PlayerProfiler. He's here to help us break down our lineups this week to get it set for an all-important Week 16. Pete and I are going to be breaking down why we like an unlikely hero in the form of Devin White this week to push our teams in the fantasy football championships. We also really like Chase Young this week as he goes up against Brady Cook and the Jets. With all those players that we like, it's sad to say that we have to fade some, and one of those is Bobby Wagner this week. And find out why Father Time isn't the only battle that Wagner is facing. If that sounds like something that you and your teams could use this week, sit back, listen in, and let's get after it on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
All right, before we get into our names for this week, Pete, I want to ask you a question about setting your lineup during the playoffs versus the regular season. Do you approach your roster construction in your fantasy leagues differently for the playoffs?
Yeah, I try to usually approach the regular season where, it really depends on what my record usually is, right? I mean, I can take maybe more chances if I have, a better record or vice versa. It all depends. The regular season, I tend to play it safer sometimes because I have more ground to catch up with more games. In the postseason, not as much, right? So I generally shoot for upside in most cases in the postseason. A perfect example for me is, this past week I lost a fantasy matchup because I played it safe, right? I started Sam Darnold over Marcus Mariota, who I had as a top 12 quarterback this past week. But because Sam Darnold felt safer, because the offense is better and, just a better, safer environment, I went and I started Darnold like 5 minutes before my matchup to play it safe. And I ended up losing by 5 points and Mariota outscored him by 7, right? So that's something I'm going to sit here and think about all offseason. But I think for me, I also look at it like I'm not afraid to say bench a quote unquote stud for a guy that maybe wasn't drafted in the preseason or wasn't drafted high, but has maybe made some noise the last couple weeks. And we have a lot of data to say, hey, that guy is a reliable player to start and he's got a good matchup. Or maybe the stud has not produced well in tough matchups and has another tough matchup. So I'm okay to get quote unquote cute if it makes sense in my matchups as well.
And I think that's no truer in any season than this one. This season just seems to be really an outlier with the number of injuries to big name players and just some like real big, highly drafted studs that aren't performing on both sides of the ball. Before the show, I know we were talking about like sitting Justin Jefferson as a player, like, as an example, because he just really hasn't been performing. And, and I know it's tough because you drafted him in the first round and things like that. So, just being willing to pivot and be able to make the smart move, I think, is sometimes tough to do, especially in IDP with some of the players that we drafted so heavily, so high. So, all right, Pete, let's jump into a player here on the defensive line that you really like heading into Week 16, and I really like this call. I was going to pick him, but he beat me to it.
Yeah, it's Chase Young for me. Chase Young taking on the New York Jets. Chase Young, right, a high drafted player, right, in 2020 with the Washington Commanders, right? Things didn't really work out, right? He dealt with some injuries, kind of fizzled out towards the back half. Everyone was, after his first year, people were super excited about Chase Young, thought he had a really bright future. And then things kind of just turned a little bit, right? And his career didn't really pan out the way, people had wanted and hoped it would. But he takes on a New York Jets team who has a struggling offensive line, right? It's been one of the weaker units in pass blocking this season. They've shuffled guys in and out due to injuries. Elijah Vera-Tucker, arguably their best offensive lineman, has been gone all season. No Morgan Moses, who is their steady veteran that they brought in last year. He's no longer with the team. And it's just a lot of young guys that are struggling to kind of figure things out under a new regime, and the continuity is not there yet. But Chase Young, look, I think he's going to be put in some frequent pass rush situations here with the New York Jets because the Saints offense has been okay. Now they are missing some players, but ultimately the offense has looked better than it did to start the year, and Chase Young has also looked better than he did to start the year. Over the last 4 weeks, he's had 3 3 sacks. He's had 15 total pressures, 8 solo tackles, 5 assisted tackles. And to me, he shows a guy that's got a stable floor this week with some pretty solid upside, right? We normally look at Chase Young and we assume pass rush guy, not going to rack up a bunch of tackles, but he has been able to get in there in the run defense as well. And overall, the Saints defensive front has been good. This is a team that's playing inspired football under Kellen Moore, right? They just beat 2 divisional opponents back to back. They swept the Carolina Panthers, and they're taking on a Jets team that right now pretty much just had their hearts ripped out in Jacksonville against a team that just beat up on them really, really bad. And they're starting a quarterback who, is making his second career start, who was not drafted very high. And that's going to be a cold weather game. And I'm sorry, that's not going to be a cold weather game. It's going to be in New Orleans, which is a tough environment to play as well. So I expect Chase Young to be a really, really nice play this week. I'm expecting him to be somewhere between a half sack and a full sack, somewhere between 2 and 3 pressures, and project him to have somewhere between 2 and 4 tackles, which is kind of in line with what he's done over the last 4 weeks. And then a little bit of an upside situation here because it is the Jets, and this one could get ugly pretty quickly.
I like this call for a lot of reasons. He's just been playing some really inspired football as of late, looking for that long-term deal. And how many times have we seen players not pan out for the team they were originally drafted on, but it's that second or maybe even that third team that it finally clicks for them. And Chase Young fits that example to a T as far as like finally figuring it out for himself and for the team. So like the call, especially this week. He's got a great matchup for the Jets. I think that this game could be like low key competitive, where both teams are going to be kind of throwing the ball here a little bit. So,
yeah, and this is a guy that bet on himself, right? He signed a 1-year deal in 2024. He got the extension for 3 years, $51 million as well, and he's still pretty young. So, this is a guy. He's only 26 years old, and pass rushers are kind of like tight ends and tackles. Like they age pretty well for the most part in the NFL. So he's got a decent amount of time left as long as he stays healthy.
Yep. Sticking with the theme of young, talented defensive ends, I'm going to go out to the Chargers for mine. I'm going to go with Tui Tuipulotu, and he's coming off a 2-sack game. He's got 4 in his last 3, so he's kind of on a heater in that regard. He gets a Dallas team that just gave up 3 sacks last week into Minnesota. These tackles for the Cowboys have given up 9 sacks on the season, and I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but they've been coming much more frequently in the last couple of games. The Chargers, on the other hand, their defense has really been playing extremely well. They were just coming off a 5-sack game last week against Kansas City. They literally knocked Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs out of the playoffs for the first time since Reagan was in office. So that's, teams playing really well at the right time. Their tackle, Nathan Thomas, is currently the 81st out of 82 ranked tackles in the league right now, according to PFF. He's got a 32.6 pass blocking grade, which puts him right near the bottom. And he's really just allowing consistent pressures from the left side. Tuli has 64 pressures on the season, with 12 of those ending in a sack. Those pressures put him as a top 8 in the league, and those 12 sacks have him tied for 5th at the moment. So we see a player that's getting the pressures. He's finishing the plays. Many times we see players with high pressure rates but not getting the sacks, or we see extremely high sack rate with low pressures, but Tuli is doing exactly how we want it to be. He's getting a consistent amount of pressures, and he's turning those into sacks. The Chargers have something to play for. They're a little motivated. They're still an outside shot. They can win this division. At least they want to secure themselves a good playoff spot. Dallas is not. And so is that going to play a factor in this game? Are we going to see like a demotivated Cowboys unit where we kind of maybe see the Chargers kind of run it up? Or are we going to see kind of a potential shootout with Dallas's defense not being able to stop anybody? And then so that way it kind of leads to some Chargers offense there as well. So could be an interesting week 16 as far as like game script and narratives going in this one.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I mean, the fact that this guy is top 5 in sacks, and it doesn't really feel like he's a household name yet. He was still a pretty high draft pick, right? 2nd-round pick, 55th off the board in 2023, and he's having a career year, and he seems like he's getting better every single season, right? His rookie season, he had 8 total sacks, 9 sacks the year after, and 12 total sacks. Jesse Minter's doing a really good job at deploying this defense, and I think ultimately the secondary has been really, really good, in my opinion, opinion, for them. I honestly think it's the best part of this unit is the secondary. They're very stingy, led by Derwin James. And I think going up against a really, really good passing offense, I don't think Dallas is going to be afraid to throw the football, but I think those corners and that secondary can hold up enough to allow this unit like Tuli, who is, I guess, led by Tuli because he's doing better than Khalil Mack this year, who's still having a solid season. But, guys like Tuli and Khalil Mack to be able to get home because Dak may have to hold the football just a little bit longer. So I really like the call out here. He's having a great season, and he's been really fun to watch and a nice player that's emerged.
And I like the fact that you mentioned Khalil Mack in this too, because he's played better when Mack was in. We saw kind of a dry spell for Tuli when Mack was out with his injury, but now there's some attention drawn. They might have to like put the tight end to that side. They might have to chip with the running back on Khalil Mack's side. So that's allowed Tuli a little bit more of an opportunity, and I think he's definitely like paid off for him having that opportunity. So I'm just hoping that the Chargers can like find someone in free agency that Tuli doesn't have to be the one next season, because like you said, he does way better with as a number 2 on the defensive unit. I know he's putting up number 1 type stats, but it's only from the benefit of having like an all-world player across from you. So
yeah.
All right, let's go to the Cadillac of the IDP world. Linebackers. Who's that linebacker you're firing up this week?
Yeah, it's going to be Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs. He takes on the Tennessee Titans, and I was kind of surprised Bolton's not higher in many consensus rankings. Last 4 weeks, he's been phenomenal, right? 42 total tackles, 19 solo, 23 assisted. He's also had 3 of those tackles for a loss. He's averaging 10.5 total tackles per game, and he's given us 63.75 snaps, right? I mean, this is a guy that's pretty much is the centerpiece of this defense, right? It's been Chris Jones for a really long time. Chris Jones is still playing some solid football, but he's not that dominant force. And he's not the green dot, of course. Like Nick Bolton is the captain, in my opinion, of this defense, at least that he's calling the plays. Chris Jones is the veteran, so he's probably the captain, I guess. But you get the point. But I mean, Bolton's, been in coverage as well, 25.3 coverage snaps per game. Right? He's not being used to blitz a ton, so you're not going to be expecting him to, get a sack here and there. But ultimately, I think he can capitalize in this game, right? This game, it's completely changed from what we would have expected it to be coming in a couple of weeks ago, right? Kansas City going to Tennessee, their backs are against the wall these last couple of weeks. This is an easy game for them, maybe a get-right game for them as they make a push to make the playoffs, right? And now no Patrick Mahomes and, going to be Gardner Minshew back there. And Gardner Minshew is not going to push the tempo in this game and push the points, forcing Cam Ward and the Titans offense to have to throw the football a ton, right? We have seen the Titans build an identity on running the football. Lately, they've rushed for 22 total attempts per game, and that's been mainly because Tony Pollard has found a lot of success. He's a good running back. I think he's been held back by this offense, and they're starting to figure it out a little bit, and it has not really been that advantageous of a team when it comes to they haven't turned the football over much the last couple of weeks, right? So you're going to need to make your hay just rallying to the football. And there's not a lot of talent on the outside that's going to push the ball down the field, which makes me think even more that they're going to want to keep this game tight. They're going to want to control the football as much as they can. And it's going to be a lot of rushes. And I think Nick Bolton gives us a really safe floor with double-digit tackle potential here. So I'm really excited to see him in this matchup. He can rally to the football, even if a guy like Chigakonkwo gets going a little bit. He can still get some tackles in coverage, but he's going to make his hay rallying to the football and getting Tony Pollard to the ground. And I'm excited to fire him up in my leagues.
And I think that the offensive coordinator for Tennessee has decided, we don't need Cam Ward to take all the hits that he has been taking. He was on a record-setting pace for sacks. And, I just think that like they're trying to play the long game here with their number 1 overall pick. Let's keep them upright. Let's get through the rest of this season. Let's keep the clock running. And that means running the ball. And that means tackles for your opposing defensive players, including Nick Bolton. So, all right. My linebacker is going to be a player that's going to be on the field a ton if they play anything like they did last week. I don't know if you saw, but the Las Vegas Raiders were on the field for offensively just for 39 snaps last weekend. If that holds true to this week and that game script is kind of plays out like we think it might, Houston's going to be on the field a ton, and that means they're going to be running the ball a lot. And when that happens, we see a lot of garbage time tackles at the end of the game where Houston's just running the ball out, 3-4 yards at a time, right into Devin White's arms. White has been a cornerstone, which is really weird to say this season for the Raiders. He's played 891 snaps this season. I think if we would go back to August and you would have said that, and that he is the number 3 overall linebacker right now in Big 3 scoring with 213 points, I don't think you would have had too many people take you up on that. But that's exactly what he's done. He's played a ton of snaps. Last weekend, the Raiders played 69 snaps on defense because they only played 39 on offense. Devin White had 16 combined tackles in that game. Very similar script could be happening this week. He's super high tackle numbers all season long. It gives him a super high floor. Akeem Davis-Gaither last week had 11 combined tackles against Houston on 67 snaps. So it's very eerily similar to the game that Devin White had. Like I mentioned, White's currently the linebacker 3 on the season with Big 3 scoring with 230 points. Not a lot of splash plays for him this season. So he's really been vaulted by the 149 tackles. And he doesn't need the splash plays if he's getting that kind of volume to be an LB1 this weekend. So if I have White, he's probably been a gift this year. Probably didn't invest a lot into him. Maybe picked him up off the waivers after week 1 or even maybe week 2. And he's been a plug and play guy all season long. He got me here. I'm going to ride him, especially in this matchup.
Yeah, the one beautiful thing about fantasy football is that guys do not have to be that good to be producing in fantasy football. If you talk to many people that watch film, they'll tell you Devin White has been absolutely terrible this year. I mean, coverage assignments blown, not being in the right gaps, like just really bad. But he has racked up a lot of tackles, right? And tackles feel like a job security thing where people assume, hey, this guy must be really good because he's getting a lot of tackles. And he has really, really rallied to the football here. But, he's also kind of, just like I said, missed out on some assignments. I think he's a really good play this week. Like you mentioned, right, Houston in this game, they're going to likely be up big and they're going to probably run the football, right? And they're going to try to get that running game going, right? They've Woody Marks has kind of been up and down with injuries. Nick Chubb as well. It could be a Wale this week. And so that could be a little bit of a factor. I'm curious to see if Woody Marks for some reason can't go. And we're recording this, of course, on a Wednesday night. So, we're not exactly sure when the injury reports and how they're going to be looking. Thursday should be the more important one. Wednesday, not as much. We'll see if they can give it a go. I do worry a little bit only with Devin White if those guys don't go, because Wale, I don't know how much they're going to rely on him with a heavy volume if Nick Chubb and Woody Marks miss. But I do expect one of those guys to play. And if they do, they should probably lean on that running game because the passing game has been good, right? The passing game has been much better, which is crazy to say because it was probably the worst part of this team to begin the year. But now the passing game is there, right? They're going to need to get that running game figured out. And so they might use that as a key emphasis, especially against a Raiders team that's just not very good. So I think Devin White's a really, really good play. Maybe he comes out pissed off. He was pissed off on social media this week, fighting with Greg Allman, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers longtime beat writer there, who commented on Ian Rappaport's tweet this week that said maybe Devin White should get comeback player of the year. And Allman kind of came out and said volume tackles are kind of misleading. Devin White didn't really like it, and he kind of deleted his tweets. And, that's kind of how these things go sometimes on social. So maybe he comes out really pissed off, and maybe that's a better thing for us and Devin White racking up even more tackles.
Yeah, him and Max Crosby even were exchanging words coming off the field at the end of that game. So he's not that he's a player that probably needs to be any more pissed off. He just seems like he's not a very happy camper sometimes. But hey, like you said, you don't have to be good to be in my lineup on IDP. Sometimes it's better that offensive coordinators like scheme plays to you because you're not good. And so maybe the age is finally caught up with Devin White. I know he was kind of a descending player after his really breakout season in Tampa, where he was like literally the LB1 for a season or two there, and then all of a sudden he's fallen off the planet. But hey, we'll take his resurgence here in 2025. All right, moving to the secondary. Who is the defensive back that you like? You got an oldie but a goodie here.
Yeah, Budda Baker for me, who I was excited to draft him. I know, if you play on Fast Draft, I drafted a little bit of him on the back end. I don't usually draft too many DBs high, but guys that can make game-changing plays like Budda Baker, who can kind of play that hybrid. He plays up in the box. He can also cause some turnovers and some havoc. So I took some swings on Baker. He hasn't been that good this year, but over the last 4 weeks, 3.75 solo tackles per game, 4.25 assisted tackles per game. He's given us 11.97 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. He takes on the Atlanta Falcons, whose offense is looking a lot different these days, right? No Michael Penix, possibly no Drake London, and it's really being funneled to the tight end position right now. And we saw Kyle Pitts have a big breakout. And honestly, it's kind of like once the toothpaste is out of the tube, how do you put it back in? And right now with Kyle Pitts, with Kirk Cousins, who's looking to maybe land a job somewhere else, if not in Atlanta, Kyle Pitts has got to be your best friend, I got to think. And who better to cover Kyle Pitts than Budda Baker in this matchup? When you look at Budda Baker, he's had 10 slot snaps per game over the last 4 weeks. And Kyle Pitts has logged 20 slot snaps in the last 4 weeks. I think Budda Baker makes a lot of sense in this one. He's played 63 snaps per game over the last 4 weeks. He's got the consistent snap share. And I think if you look at this offense, because Kirk Cousins is out there, they're not really pushing the ball down the field, right? So it's a lot of underneath quick outs, crossers, check downs, and it gives a guy like Budda Baker enough time to rally up to the football and make a lot of tackles, clean up some plays. And as well as if he can get in there and cover Kyle Pitts, which I think that's going to be the big matchup in this game, right? He could get some PBUs. Kyle Pitts maybe gets the best of him. We just talked about, what we like in fantasy. Honestly, sometimes having a guy that's not good in coverage, especially in the DB side of things, that's what we want, right? Because they're at least going to get heavily targeted and they can clean up some sacks. And if they're a guy like Trevion Diggs, who's maybe not that good, but he can be a ball hawk, he'll get you a lot of tackles and he'll create a turnover here and there, right? That's what we look for. And I think Budda Baker is in line for a good game. I think it matches up really well, especially if Kyle Pitts is the focus and they're smart enough to put him on Kyle Pitts in this matchup.
And I think because London's not in, he'll be there because they really don't have a linebacker that has the skills to stay with Kyle Pitts. And so he's naturally going to be towards the line of scrimmage anyway, already picking up Kyle Pitts. And then if Bijan does Bijan things, he can maybe pick up 2 or 3 tackles in the run game. Maybe, Bijan's been really good in the passing game. We get another tackle or 2 there. All of a sudden we're like at a 5 tackle game already, and we haven't even mentioned covering, getting his just normal work. So I love this call. And Baker's been a guy for years that's carried fantasy football teams, especially in the playoffs. And let's just pick it up one more time. So, all right. I'm going to switch to one of the better matchups for secondary players this week, and I'm going to go with Malik Mustapha. He's coming off of 4 straight double-digit games. He has 24 tackles in his last 3. Indy is the best tackle opportunity for opposing safeties on the season with 16.5 per game. And I know that Indy's offense looks a lot different than it did when they kind of established themselves as maybe one of the best matchups. But I think an extra week of practice for Phillip Rivers is going to make it a lot better of an offense for them than they were last week. Maybe a few longer drives. And to be honest, anytime you have Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, that secondary has a chance to be involved really, really quickly. He plays a little deeper than Jair Brown has been, but he's making more plays than Brown has this season. And I kind of expect that to continue this week. I like Malik Mustapha as a DB2 this week, but if you have him or opportunity to play him as a DB3 or a flex spot, I really like that matchup. Also kind of playing on Monday night gives you a little bit of a glimmer of hope, something to look forward to. So maybe, maybe for some reason you benched Marcus Mariota and played Sam Darnold and you need a little bit of hope to get a little bit of a Monday night miracle, then you have that to look forward to. And I think sometimes, especially with weeks like this, where we have a Thursday night game, we've got some on Saturday, we've got some on Sunday, where those weeks where the games are kind of stretched out, it could be sometimes like a slow death. And at least with playing a player on Monday night, you've got a little bit okay, I'm down by 24 points, but at least I got a chip in a chair. That's all I need. So maybe Malik Mustapha is your chip in a chair this week.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad call at all. When you just factor in that this run defense for the 49ers has been pretty lackluster too, maybe he can, Jonathan Taylor, kind of like Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor is a player that can get to that second, third level pretty quickly. And so maybe he breaks off a couple and Mustafa has to make a couple of touchdown saving tackles or even just get in on the run fits, right? 9 tackles last week, 6, and then 7, right? I mean, he hasn't not been afraid to kind of get in there and stick his nose, on the football. And so I think it's a good call. He's also played in the box a decent amount, 19 snaps, 24 snaps, 17 snaps, right? So he has played, kind of close to the line of scrimmage enough where you say to yourself, hey, between that and the fact that the front in front of him is not very good, and they're playing against a good old line that should put a hat on a hat, and a good running back in JT that can find the holes, he should find some work as long as he can make the right tackle fits and take the right angles. And we've seen him do that the last couple of weeks. So I think it's a good call, to go out there and roll him out as well.
All right. Before we get into the players that we're fading this week, let's just recap some of the players that we like a little more this week. At the defensive line position, we got Chase Young and Tui Tuipulotu. I'm going to butcher it every single time I say it. Doesn't matter. Linebackers are Nick Bolton and Devin White. We got Budda Baker and Malik Mustapha as our defensive back. So now we're going to flip the script here a little bit, Pete, and we're going to start talking about some players that we're fading a little bit. This doesn't mean that they're players that we're benching, but maybe just lowering expectations on, especially as we're starting to do some roster construction for our playoffs, because there isn't a next week. We have to get our lineups right. And so maybe it's a player we're still going to play, but maybe somewhere else in our defensive line, our flex spot, we're going to have a higher floor play or, like just somebody to kind of maybe counteract, like, oh, they've been getting us 13, 14 points every week this season. They got a bad matchup. They're probably going to only get me 6 or 7. Where can I make up those points? Is that somewhere on the offensive side? Maybe a wide receiver's got a great matchup, that kind of thing, just so you're kind of aware of like what we're kind of thinking here. So defensive line, you got a big name here. You better have some good reasons why we're not playing or fading him this week.
Yeah, for me, it's Josh Hines-Allen, and I'm tempering expectations for him, right? I mean, I get it, right? He's the 10th ranked player over the last 4 weeks. He's had an average of 11.1 points per game. He's had 5 sacks in the last 5 weeks. Last week, he did not generate a sack, but I think, which was actually kind of surprising against the Jets because they kind of went to a heavy pass script. You would have thought with all those opportunities he would have got there, especially against a pretty weak offensive line. But he's had 10 solo tackles, 1 assisted tackle over that last 4 weeks that we talked about. But for him, he's relied heavily on sacks. He's not getting much in the run game where he's generating many tackles for us. I mean, we're talking about a guy who over the last 4 weeks, he's averaging about 2 total tackles, right? Like a little bit over 2.5, right? And in this matchup, he goes up against one of the best offensive lines in football. He's got Garrett Bowles, who's allowed 0 sacks all season and 1 pressure a game this year, right? So 0 sacks and 1 pressure a game. And then you look at Mike McGlinchey on the other side. He's allowed 1 sack all season. So 1 sack combined for the 2 tackles on this team, who he's going to heavily be going up against in the matchups in this matchup, right? You also factor in Nix has shown really good escapability, right? He took 0 sacks against Micah Parsons, who had over 20 pass rush snaps last week before getting injured, right? Micah Parsons was not able to get home either, right? And that's a good defense, right? With Edgerrin James as well. And so you factor all that in. It's going to be in Denver. This is going to be a high energy game, right? This is a playoff atmosphere kind of game. And sometimes people or teams travel to Denver late in the season, especially pass rushers. You got to hope that your conditioning is up because you're going to get winded in this one. And especially again, a matchup where you're going to have to fight for every single pass rush snap, right? And he doesn't get a lot of work in the run game. You got to hope that he gets home. And I just don't think that ceiling is there from what we've seen in the past. So I think he's a guy to be wary about, in this matchup against Denver.
And having guys play against Denver on the fade list is nothing new to the show. Like, they've been that really hard team to get home on. And I think that's the biggest thing here. It's either I get a sack or it's a bust week, just because of the fact that he doesn't have that high tackle floor like some of these other players that we often mention do. So good call.
I would say the only other thing I could maybe see, the one thing Denver does is they like to do these jet sweeps with the wide receivers like Marvin Mims. Maybe he can get a tackle or two on those, and they like to get RJ Harvey sometimes out in space on pitches. So maybe he can get some, because sometimes Sean Payton's a little gimmicky and they do throw close to line of scrimmage. So maybe he can get a tackle or there too to kind of raise the floor. But again, to the initial point, I just don't think the ceiling is that high.
Hopefully the same thing doesn't happen to Josh Hines-Allen that the last week's player in the spot. We Mike Woolert was on last week and he put in Micah Parsons as his player to fade, and so we all saw what happened there. So hopefully, knock on wood, we don't keep losing stud defensive linemen to the fade list here. So all right, if you caught last week's show, this is not a repeat. This is there's Alex Highsmith is this player for me again this week. I don't like to keep hammering players, but seeing him ranked as a top 10 player this week over Fantasy Pros, I just can't help it but feel there's a lot of room for disappointment here. Detroit gave up just one sack last week to the Rams, and Detroit has been one of, if not the worst matchup for opposing tackle opportunities for defense. So just to your point about Josh Allen, it's either all or nothing. It's either going to be a sack or it could really be a bust week. You combine that low sack opportunity with a really low tackle rate, the floor is really, really low. Goff is a little better than average when getting rid of the ball, and Detroit is a really timing-based offense right now that wants the quick, accurate throws, and it shows because Goff is leading the league with pass rush or passing accuracy. So it's a real quick get rid of the ball. Let's not give him time to do those kind of things to our offense. If we look at Highsmith's pressure rate from last year to this one, we see a really big, significant drop-off. Last year, he was one of the league's best at 16.79% pass rush rate. This year, that's dropped to 12.12%. So that's a lot fewer opportunities for him to make a sack and even apply pressure. Last year, Alex Highsmith had 323 pass rushing snaps, which led to 54 pressures. This season, he's got 245 pressures, or 245 pass rushing snaps, but only 31 pressures. So on about 90 less snaps, he's got 23 fewer pressures. So, I don't see him reaching those numbers by the end of the season. Even if he were, he would have to have a 20% pass rusher rate. Maybe he can do that for a game, but to sustain that over a course of 3 or 4 games left in the season, I don't think that's going to happen. So maybe he's a great buy low this offseason because of a manager might be a little upset with the production and things like that, but I'm not willing to risk my week 16 playoff spot having him as a DL1 this week. I have him closer to a DL3 with no teams on buys. I just think there's too many solid options to kind of risk this as he's my DL1 this week.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's kind of it could be a big issue too is TJ Watt going to play in this game? Because that we talked about it with Tuli, right? TJ Watt is that alpha, right? And he draws a lot of attention, and now you factor in that he may not play. I don't know what the status is. He didn't play last week. I don't know if he's going to play this week, but that could also have a huge impact as well, right? Now, instead of, him getting the one-on-one matchups, he's probably going to get double teamed or he's going to get chipped. Those chips that would go, or those double teams that would go to TJ are now going to go to Highsmith, who is a good player. And that's why they're going to likely give him extra attention. And you mentioned Jared Goff gets the ball out very quick, right? I expect them to push the ball downfield in this one. And so, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to be a little bit cautious about Highsmith this week.
And the other thing to consider is Detroit has really, really solid tackles. That's probably the strength of their unit. If you're going to be getting pressure on this team, it's probably going to be coming from up the middle. Their guards and center aren't as solid, so you're probably going to see a lot more pressures coming up the middle. We're going to probably see some plays from Derek Harmon and those kind of things. That's probably where the pressure is going to come, right in Goff's face rather than on the outside. All right, you are doubling down on big name fades here this week. You went with Josh Hines-Allen as your defensive lineman. Who you got at the linebacker spot?
Yeah, I hope your listeners don't get the pitchforks out here, because for me, I am a little bit concerned about Jack Campbell in this matchup. Jack Campbell, same game here. We're talking Lions, we're talking Steelers, and I'm not saying he's going to sit him, but I do think he possibly could disappoint in this one. A lot of people I've seen on Fantasy Pros, they have him ranked in the top 5, and for good reason, right? He's been number 3 linebacker overall the last 4 weeks, 16.3 points per game. I just don't know if that 16 points is what we can expect this week. He's playing against the Steelers, who are 7-point dogs, right? We'll talk about game script in this one. This is a game where Detroit, I expect to be able to push the ball downfield. And right now, the Lions' biggest issue is the secondary, right? No Branch, right? They can be exposed in the secondary much more than they can be exposed on the ground. And while the Steelers have been a team mainly that's gotten most of the things done on the ground, the last 2 weeks Aaron Rodgers has looked really effective, right? And he's thrown the ball very, very well over the last 2 weeks, and he gets the ball out extremely quickly. It's a 51.5 point total. Again, Steelers are 7-point dogs. I expect them to be playing from behind in this one, right? Steelers run the lowest amount of plays on offense of any team in the NFL, 55.7. And so couple that with the fact that low amount of plays and also, an offense that's going to probably throw the football a ton, it just doesn't bode well for Campbell, who makes his hay racking up a lot of tackles, right? He's got 6.25 tackles per game and solos, and then 5 assisted tackles per game, which is giving us a great floor. In terms of targets, right? He's been targeted 4 times. So teams aren't even targeting him that much either. Now, the flip side and the positive spin on this is a Steelers team that loves to use their tight ends. And so if Jack Campbell can, be in coverage against those tight ends, then maybe he can rack up some of those tackles that he would be missing because they're not running it nearly as much. But my expectations, I'm not expecting a blow up spot for him like we've seen in the past because of the game script and just from what we've seen. Rodgers is projected to throw the football 32 times this week. That's one of the highest. That would be one of the highest he's thrown all season long. So again, you just got to hope that Rodgers is going to be thrown to the tight end position or Jaylen Warren out of the backfield, which he tends to do pretty often, and Kenneth Gainwell. So you might be able to make up some of those points there, but I just don't know if the ceiling is as high because of the way the game script may go.
And when you have a player like top 5, that's like rare air. Like that is like locked and loaded. And like you said, I don't know if this week's game script is really that airtight to be a top 5 linebacker this week. So I'm with you here. So I didn't think I would ever do this, but I am fading one of the icons of IDP, and that's going to be Bobby Wagner this week. I don't think I can ever sit Bobby Wagner in a week that he's actually suited up for a football game, but this one's going to be a tough one for him. Wagner has made his numbers all season long with super high tackle numbers this season because he's lost a step or two. And this weekend, unfortunately, he gets the worst tackle opportunity for opposing linebackers going up against Philly. They just allow 11.9 tackle opportunities per game this season. And it's not like we're like 2-3 weeks into the season. We're looking at 15 weeks of data that we've collected, and they're only giving up 11.9 tackles this week. I think that number is boosted a little bit by last week's Las Vegas Raiders tackle numbers is the only reason it's probably in double digits at this point. Not only does he have a really bad matchup this week, but he's also managing a knee injury that's kept him out of practice on Tuesday. And I know that's not a major deal for players, especially veterans at this point in the season, because they do often get the veteran day rest and stuff like that. But he is playing in his 13th season, so maybe this is hitting him just a little bit different. His PFF metrics are all lower than we've seen at any previous season, especially his coverage grades. And teams have been attacking that area of the ball or the area of the field with running backs and tight ends. And that's exactly what Philadelphia has. They have great running backs that can catch out of the backfield. They have some great tight ends that are catching there. And Philly uses that. We saw it last week. They just kind of, Goddard had a great game, and, Barkley always has some decent catches and stuff out of the backfield. So I don't know if Wagner can keep up. The Eagles ran 59 plays, are running 59 plays per game, which ranks them 25th in the league. And so game script is going to suggest that the Eagles are going to be winning. They're going to be running the clock. They're not going to need to push the ball this weekend. And so that means that he's not going to have a lot of tackle opportunities because they just run so few plays. The Commanders' offense is literally hurting like at every position on offense, at the quarterback position, the running back position. I know that Rodriguez missed last week. He's been practicing a little bit this week. The wide receivers, they just put Noah Brown on IR this week. They're hurting there. Obviously, Zach Ertz left with that IR injury with his ACL. So, like, this offense isn't putting up a fight either on the offensive side of the ball. So Philly's not going to have to put up a fight offensively. So they're just going to kind of like be able to get their 13-point lead and just run the ball and soak up clock. So I see him ranked as linebacker 6 this week, and I think that's probably just because of the name Bobby Wagner. I can maybe see him and start him as an LB2 this week, but in a league, it's really possible where you're starting 2 linebackers only. You probably have 2 better options right now. Father Time is and always will be undefeated in this one. So even against one of the Mount Rushmore linebackers of football, it's going to be a tough week for him to be anything more than a linebacker 2.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't really have too much to add to that. I think you laid it out perfectly. I also I love Bobby Wagner. I can't hate on him too much. So I'll let you do the hating and the fading on this one, and I'll abstain to you here.
I'm not hating. He's carried me through numerous years, like back in the Seahawk days and stuff like that. But 13 years at linebacker in the NFL, I mean, dude, we got spoiled with linebackers that season between him, Demario Davis, Kuechly, Levante David. Like, that was maybe the most epic linebacker class ever. He just came out of Utah and was just ooze stud. He's him. So
Mario's still giving it a go too, man. I mean, he's been awesome. I love his story too. So he's been great. It's awesome to see that guys like him and Bobby are still playing. I think he's probably playing at a higher level than Bobby, but both have still played it, had a solid season. Yes. Bobby's still he's just slowing down in that pass coverage, man. Yep. I mean, he's just so slow out there.
Yeah. But he's just so good at diagnosing plays. Like, he knows where they're going before they go. And that's part of like why he's a league leader right now in tackles, is because he just is so cerebral with the game, where he knows where to go with it. So,
yeah, he knows where to be.
Yeah. But unfortunately, like all of us, Father Time always wins. So, yeah. All right, let's flip it to our last position of the fades. Who's a defensive back that you're kind of fading this week?
Yeah, for me, it's going to be Tyson Campbell of the Browns. Maybe not the hottest name. He's probably seen as a DB3, but this is a player who's been pretty solid over the last 4 weeks. In general, from a fantasy perspective, but he's kind of fizzled out the last 2. Right, 5.3 points, 6 points. He takes on the Buffalo Bills. Just 3.75 tackles per game and 2 assists per game. He's also averaging 1 pass breaker per game. So he's given us a decent floor for a cornerback. But my concern in this one is, Bills spread the ball around a ton. And, lately they've heavily favored, going to the tight end position. And I think, honestly, the ball is going to go away from Campbell, where normally he'd be able to kind of, maybe rally to the football and make some tackles if the wide receivers are getting the football. I just don't see it here in this matchup with Buffalo. Some might sit here and think, hey, Buffalo is going to pour it on. They're going to throw the football a ton. They're going to sling it around the yard. They smell blood in the water with this Browns team, and the defense has kind of been not that great the last couple of weeks. But the biggest struggle for that defense has really been the run defense has struggled tremendously. And right now James Cook is playing extremely well. So it would not surprise me that Buffalo gets out to a strong lead, and they don't have to really throw the football around a ton. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Josh Allen's going to throw less than 20 attempts, but the amount of attempts that are going to go to the outside are going to be limited, in my opinion, because, I think they're going to favor the middle linebackers. And now Carson Schwarzenegger's been awesome. So that's not even to say that they're going to pick on him. It's just really that the tight ends have been the favorite in the passing game, and James Cook out of the backfield for Josh Allen as of late. So I do have a little bit of concerns there with him. If he's a player that you've maybe gotten by with, again, as like a DB3 for you, I just I'm not super up to play him this week, and not a sexy name, but just one player I would use. I'd be pretty cautious. To be fair, I have picked some heavy hitters, so it makes sense that I maybe go with one that's maybe not too balls to the wall.
You needed a layup.
Yeah.
I do like this call, especially in like cornerback required leagues, because Buffalo is not a great, like you would expect them to be a really heavy passing offense where they get a lot of opportunities to the cornerbacks, but they've been one of the league's worst for opposing cornerbacks. And like you said, I think game script could be a real thing. They could get out to a big lead and just kind of salt this one away. So totally could see that. I've got a player that's kind of like a fun name this week, and a player that back in August, a lot of us were really excited about because of the dual eligibility, but that's going to be James Williams of the Tennessee Titans. I know he was a player that I got really excited this weekend because Tennessee was sending half of their team to IR, especially in the secondary with 3 of them. And he's got that dual eligibility so he can play linebacker, defensive back. But I don't know if I'm willing to risk that in week 16 of my playoffs, especially when if I'm trying to be too cute, like you mentioned earlier. I know that he had 4 tackles last week on just 12 snaps, but that's not a really sticky stat for us. And combine that with a matchup for the Chiefs this week without Mahomes. With Mahomes, the Chiefs were only giving up 11.2 tackle opportunities to the safety position anyway. I don't know if this offense is going to look better without Mahomes, where they're going to have more opportunities for tackles to the safety position. So if they were only giving up 11.2 with Mahomes in it, I can't imagine that number increases without Mahomes under center. The Chiefs have nothing to play for the first time, like we mentioned, for a long time. I can see Tennessee winning this game and ruining their draft status by winning a meaningless game here in December. We see it every year. There's always that team that like, oh, they ruin their draft stack by winning a meaningless game. Like, just lose, Prior to this game, the Chiefs were running the 3rd most plays per game in the league, and they weren't giving up a lot of points to the position. So I can see them definitely running fewer plays even this week because of not being the one sustaining offense with Mahomes out there. But just there's no reason for them to play. It's one of the worst over-unders on the week with 37.5 points. So not expecting a lot of plays in this one. I think both teams are just going to try to get through the week without any more injuries to either side. Williams could possibly be an option in super deep leagues, like a 16-teamer where you're starting like 6 or 7 per team with a flex position, but I just don't see him being a name in traditional leagues where you're starting 2 at the position, maybe a couple flexes. I just don't see him as a player that I can maybe get behind this week. Just not sure what's going to happen. I know that Cedric Gray missed practice yesterday on Tuesday, and he also missed today with his concussions. So you definitely could build a case like, hey, it's going to be an opportunity for him, but I don't know. It's week 16. Am I wanting a lottery ticket in week 16 with my fantasy playoffs online? I don't know if I can take that risk.
Yeah, and crazy enough, this game Titans are +3, so the line is pretty close. They think this is a close matchup. So yeah, I mean it's really hard. I think it's really hard to see a guy come back. He didn't play a ton of snaps last week. It's hard to put him out there in a league maybe that's not super deep. Again, like you had mentioned, if you're playing in a deeper league, I totally get that. But even when he came back in week 14, right, he only played 1 snap, right? So 1 snap there and then 12 last week. So they didn't really. It wasn't like, hey, 12 snaps the first week, 15 snaps the next week. Maybe this week it's a double up, and like they really barely used him the first week they had him activated. Now they are limited, like you had mentioned, with possibly some injuries, so that might thrust him into, playing more. But this is also a younger player. He's a 7th round pick. Do they want to risk it? I don't know. I mean, this is also the time where a player has to make a name for himself. 7th round pick, not a lot of equity, right? Possible change and turnover in this, in this, in the GM spot too. Maybe it could happen. I don't know. But the front office could make some changes, or at least a new coaching staff. And so he's going to have to put some stuff on tape. So maybe that's a little bit of a pushback to you. But I do think regardless, it's a really risky play. And it's really hard to sit there and pinpoint it and say, yeah, I feel super confident throwing this guy out there. The upside can surely be there because he's kind of like a hybrid, but the floor is very, very low right here. And I know I like to take risks sometimes, but I'm only taking a risk like this if I'm in a really, really deep league.
And I love that, you mentioned earlier about the great thing about fantasy football. Like, this is what makes it fun, is because you can create a narrative where James Williams is a player to play this week, because there is a real world where he could definitely be a player. If I'm a long shot, I'm chasing points. The matchup this week, I'm faded, or I'm chasing by like 30 points. Like, hey, this is my lottery ticket. Like, I can't play it safe. I can't play like my Derwin James to get my 11 or 12 points. I need 20, 25 points from my defensive back position. Like James Williams is your guy, but there's also a world where he gets you 3 points. He plays, 5 or 6 snaps, and then you'll be kicking yourself on Monday morning, wishing you had Malik Mustapha in your lineup instead. So
you'll always be able to find certain things to give you confirmation bias or to flip you the other way, right?
Yep.
I mean, but there's always it's just stay even keeled. Your league, and if you're willing to take the risk and take a shot because you're a big underdog, like you said, then sure, maybe he is for you. But most situations, probably not.
All right. Last segment here, we're just going to quickly recap some players that were fading on the defensive line. Josh Hines-Allen and Alex Highsmith. Pete kept bringing the big names. Jack Campbell as a player to fade at the linebacker spot. I got Bobby Wagner, Tyson Campbell, and then finally we've got our James Williams player. Last part here, Pete, who's a player that right now, we have 15 weeks of data. We have 15 weeks of football games for these players and teams. Who's a player that's just like, what is going on with this guy? Where are you at with who's that player?
Yeah, for me, it's Marlon Humphrey for the Baltimore Ravens. This Ravens secondary was touted to possibly be the best in the league. I mean, they brought in Jair Alexander, Malachi Starks, right? They have other players in that secondary that are really good too. And I think overall, Nate Wiggins, I don't know why I was forgetting the name there. Kyle Hamilton. I mean, you think about it before the season starts, you sit there and say, this secondary is going to be awesome, right? But this defense has been bad, right? They've been better the last couple of weeks, and I get that they're kind of on the uptick, but they've played some kind of bad competition, but also came out ready to play against the Bengals, which I don't think anyone was expecting that. Now, when you look at Marlon Humphrey, right, there were some questions early on in the season with work ethic, and guys were kind of pointing fingers at each other where, Hamilton was saying stuff in press conferences. Humphreys was saying the opposite. Just didn't feel like guys were on the same page. And Marlon Humphreys would go on live after games and joke around. And I think he wore a weird costume or something after a game or something on Instagram Live or Twitch or whatever these guys use these days. It just didn't feel super serious, right? And they got behind in the first 6 games this year. He didn't score 8 fantasy points one time, not one time. And I get it. He's a corner. He's a DB. You don't expect a ton of fantasy points from these guys. And Marlon Humphreys is a solid player, so you're really not expecting him to be targeted very heavily. But every game since week 6, he's actually scored no less than 9.5. Complete flip, right? Beginning of the year, first 6 games, he didn't score over 8 points. Now he's never scored under 9.5. He's never even came close to that. So it's been kind of weird, right? I mean, he's been heavily targeted lately versus maybe earlier on in the year. He was targeted 9 times 3 games ago. He was targeted 13 times 2 games ago. Baltimore had him in the box 10.8 times per game and in the slot 25 times per game earlier on in the season, right? That's kind of changed a little bit. I think he's playing outside more. Nate Wiggins is playing really, really good football. And I think that's also kind of pushing the ball to his side of the field because Wiggins at this point in his career is a better football player at this point. And so he's been able to get more tackles because he's allowing more receptions. And, for better or for worse, right? The defense has gotten a little bit better. Humphreys has gotten better for fantasy. I still don't think he's the same guy that we saw years ago. I think he's kind of lost a step a little bit, but it's kind of been a crazy transition. I mean, it was mind blowing when I saw, literally first 6 games, didn't score more than 8 points, hasn't touched underneath 9.5 since. It's been a complete flip of the switch, and not because he's been amazing in real life. It's just been really good for fantasy.
Yep. And I think some of with the injury to Lamar Jackson, teams were beating up on Baltimore. Now all of a sudden they're playing, teams are playing to play catch up a little bit more, and you're going to see a little more in that passing volume. So, like you mentioned, with just the names between Wiggins and Hamilton and Starks, and then when they had brought in Jair Alexander, they literally had 5 first-round picks in their secondary. And like you said, this was the unit that was going to carry them. They were going to be lights out. And then that Baltimore defense just really disappointed this season, at all 3 levels of the game. Even, Roquan Smith went through a phase where there wasn't producing. That defensive line, that front 7 or the front 4 or whatever however you want to say it, they just weren't producing either. And so, that a huge identity, a very un-Baltimore-like season, kind of pointing fingers and things like that. We just don't see that from Baltimore. So,
Yeah, McDonald leaving, it was a big loss. Obviously, it's been 2 years now, but it doesn't feel like the same defense at this point. Heck, Jair Alexander, they pretty much tell them, please just leave, like just don't come back.
You got that twice in one season between Green Bay and Baltimore. Then
with deals, he didn't suit up. So, or I don't even know. I guess they put him on like the retired list, but maybe he comes back. We'll see.
He's dealing with some. I think he was dealing with some personal issues or some stuff. So, not joking about it, but just hope he gets it figured out. But from a fantasy standpoint, like definitely wasn't there. So, all right, my player, this guy has been Jekyll and Hyde like to a T this year. It's Abdul Carter for me. I don't know who this guy has been the last 3 weeks, but hopefully this is a sign of things to come. He truly had a breakout game last week with 7 tackles, a sack, a fumble recovery, and 2 forced fumbles. I know that earlier in the season, there were rumors that were swirling about his work ethic. There were some like film session mishaps. I don't know really what happened, but that was just kind of weird anyway. But this guy was drafted as a top pick last year for a reason. And I think this might be your last chance to acquire him low before next season. I've been looking kind of at the draft class for next year, and there are some nice names in the 2026 draft class at the defensive line. But there's a lot of players that are pass rushing specialists where they're not going to be true 3-down players like Abdul Carter. So right now, the value of those 2026 picks are starting to kind of needle up right now. And if I can go to the Abdul Carter manager and be like, hey, I'll offer you a 2026 second for him, I think that the value in March, April, when the real draft happens, and then May, June, July, when your actual fantasy draft happens, you're going to be much happier with Abdul Carter as a second round pick than any player that you're going to be able to land at a second round pick. So, next year, there's, like I said, there's those pass rushing specialists, but there just lacks that true 3-down players. That Carter is definitely that type. And if last week is any indication of what he's capable of doing, he's definitely a player that I would love to have on my roster. He does have a tough matchup this week against the Vikings, so he could have a down game, but that might also provide you with an opportunity to acquire low. But I would really hate to miss out on an opportunity to add a player like Carter before the season ends, especially if you can still do some trading or right when that trade window opens up in my league. I am all in on that, on making a move for Abdul Carter heading into next season. So he's my Jekyll and Hyde this year. I just can't figure out it. I hover over his name if I'm going to start him or I'm going to sit him. And last week I got lucky. I needed to start him just because of injuries, and it paid off with probably his breakout game. So,
yeah, I mean, it's very similar. This group is very similar to the group with Baltimore that we just talked about, right? I mean, the Giants, their front, I mean, you look at the players they have there. I mean, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, right? I mean, they have some really talented players. Abdul Carter, of course, too. Like, yeah, I mean, they brought in Darius Alexander, who I liked, right? Like they drafted him this year. So, very, very strange. Like we expected this defensive line to be really good. And, out of the gate, they struggled. Shane Bowen gets fired, right? Then they come out and they just fired Brian Cox, their D-line coach. They fired him during the bye week. So maybe there's a little bit to that. Maybe he was holding them back. It would not surprise me if an incompetent franchise like the New York Giants was holding back some of their players. And you also factor in, you talked about the dynasty aspect, right? You think about Brian Burns is playing amazing, right? The guys like that are on the other side that are going to attract attention, it cleans things up and it makes it better for the other players. Sure, they might eat each other like carnivores a little bit and eat into each other's production in some way, shape, or form, but the floor gets that much higher when you have those better players around them, like Dexter Lawrence, like Brian Burns. And so, Abdul Carter, I mean, he should only get better, right? He was getting a lot of pressure, but he just wasn't getting to the quarterback. Like that just was a lot of his issue to start the year. It's nice to see that he's kind of flipped the switch a little bit and, gotten the monkey off his back, maybe a little bit, and maybe can change the narrative before the season ends, because like you had mentioned, there's a lot of stuff swirling around about work ethic, falling asleep in meetings, all that stuff, right? And you hate to see it for a young player, but I would love to see him finish the year out strong.
And we've seen it, numerous times where rookies come in and it was easy for them in the college game and they just kind of come in and, it's a whole new game. Like what I was able to do in college, I was getting to the quarterback. In the pros, it's a little bit different. Players, they're the best of the best for a reason. That elite 0.01% of athletes in the NFL. Colleges, a little bit different, and go on and so on. But yeah, hopefully he figures it out but he's definitely a player that I'm going to be really active trying to acquire this offseason. Especially, I don't know, have you looked at the draft class at all next year for offense, defense, anybody?
I haven't gotten too much into the draft class. The nice thing is when the season ends, I go right into breaking down film. So I'm super excited. I'll probably actually there's a good chance I go to the combine this year, which would be super cool. But I haven't gotten too much. I know from guys that I trust, the D line seems to be really good again this year. So that might be the offensive side of the football is not nearly as exciting for those that play dynasty with offensive skill position players. It's a little bit of a down year, and this is a down class at the moment. Guys rise all the time, but yeah, the D line seems like it's going to be a good class from my. The kid in Miami is pretty good.
Yeah. I see a lot of the players like having like a very specific, like a third down pass rushing role and stuff like that. And I just think that the true 3-down players this year are going to be kind of lacking as like a player of the caliber of Carter. And maybe you can get a manager who's a little upset about like, I drafted him at 108, 109 last year and he hasn't produced. Like, oh, just give me the pick. Let me reset. So see what that makes. So, all righty, sir. This is great, Pete. I appreciate you coming back on again. I know that we did it a couple weeks ago and just had a great chat with you. Any final thoughts to our listeners about fantasy football or kind of heading forward about week 16?
Yeah, I mean it's been an awesome season. If you're still here consuming content, we all appreciate it, right? I obviously am not one of the guys here at the IDP show, right? But I know you guys do great work here, and if your listeners are still listening this point in the year, we appreciate that. So kudos to you. And yeah, I mean, super excited. It's been an awesome season all around for myself. It seems like you guys have had a great season as always, keeping that traction going from the previous seasons. And yeah, super excited to work together, possibly in the off season, do some stuff with you guys here and there as well. And yeah, not too much. I mean, if I can give one thing of advice, it's what I said originally. Don't be afraid to go out there and make a start. But if your gut's telling you, hey, this stud hasn't produced, like, do I go out there and am I going to play him because of name value? The draft was 16 weeks ago. The ADP and all that stuff, none of that matters now, right? And so you'll kick yourself if your gut tells you to go one way. You don't want to be sitting here in a month from now looking at that prize total that you could have won if you won your league and say, man, I should have just trusted my gut. Because then you'll just sit there and think about it all off season. Like I'm sitting here thinking about starting Sam Darnold over Marcus Mariota in a league that I probably had my best team out of all the leagues I'm playing in this year, which is a lot. So
you mentioned like kind of getting into the off season and start grinding tape. What kind of things can we expect from you like in the off season and anything yet this year?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm working at PlayerProfiler, so we're gonna do a ton of stuff there. I'll be at the NFL draft with PlayerProfiler, so that's gonna be super exciting. We'll be live during the draft and giving our analysis on picks. And so really the work starts and the fun starts. The off season for me is the most fun. I love breaking down the tape. I love looking at the incoming class, and so it's gonna be just a lot of breaking down tape, putting stuff out there on Twitter and as well as recording on YouTube. And nothing super. There's some things in the works on the back end that I have some announcements possibly coming, but everything I've shared today I can at least share so far. And yeah, I'm super stoked, and I'm ready for the offseason. I'm ready to watch playoff football too, and not have to worry too much about grinding in fantasy. It's always a long season, but it's a rewarding one as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's definitely labor of love, and like you said, like it's weird to watch, be excited about the last week of the season because it's the first time you can watch a game and just watch it as a fan. You don't have to watch it for data. You don't have to grind tape. You don't have to worry about stats or any of that stuff. It's the worst week from a fan perspective, but sometimes from a content creator perspective, it's like, It's a glorious week of football.
Oh, you don't have to sit there and with a pit in your stomach thinking, man, I can't believe I ranked this defense so high and they're getting their doors blown off by this crappy offense that nobody expected to come to play today. Which happens very, very often. I will say, and I don't know if you participate, but I do really enjoy playoff fantasy football as well. I mean, I am always scratching that itch, but I have a couple of really unique leagues that I play in for playoff fantasy where it's literally just, like I play in one league where you get 5 position, or I think it's 4 quarterbacks, 8 wide receivers, 6 running backs, 4 tight ends, 4 defenses, 4 kickers. There's no draft. You can just pick whoever you want, and that's your team locked in for the playoffs. And as teams get eliminated, you lose those players, and you're going up. It's just a total tournament. And usually we get about 25 to 50 guys, depending on the year. And it's a lot of fun, honestly. And I really do enjoy doing the playoff stuff as well. So again, I talk about it, but at least I don't have to produce the content for it, right? So I can still enjoy it, but I'm always scratching that itch. I always need a little bit of skin in the game. So
yeah, you can just be a fan of the game for a change. Then it's very different. So that week 18 is a different animal though when it comes to like trying to make any lineups. If you have any sicko leagues out there that play week 18 championships or anything like that, that is rough. Even like week 16, 17, you start to see some of that where players are like, an inactive, like we see like my sleeper notification is blowing up right now with players going to IR and stuff like that. And shocking is all these teams that have been eliminated from the playoffs. It's weird how that works out. So
Rashi Rice is now in concussion protocol. Like days later, we didn't hear anything about it. Now all of a sudden we get a notification today and people are freaking out. So next thing you'll hear, Travis Kelce tweaked his hammy and he's not going to go either. So guys make business decisions all the time when they're eliminated.
Yeah. So, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Pete once again for not only all the content that he creates all season long. And if you are not following him on Twitter, you're a mistake. Go out, follow. He's got great content all year long. You're like the face of Twitter right now in fantasy football. You've got like the offensive stuff going. You got your ranks and everything like that. You got your defensive stuff. You even dabble with kickers. I think I saw a couple things going on.
Not
so
too much. My co-host does the kicker stuff. I try to. People ask me kicker stuff. I'm like, listen, I can give you advice, but talk to Mike. But he's good. But you're flattering me. I mean, there's a lot of really good voices in this space, and it's just good to see people support other people's work.
Yeah. And it's great that we can kind of collab like this, like kind of crossover kind of stuff like that. And, had a great chat a couple weeks ago and get to do it again this week. So I appreciate you coming on. So
absolutely.
If you're not doing so already, please make sure you hit that like and notification button so you're always made aware of all the great content that's dropping all week long. If you are a friend of the show, you know that like we dropped the defensive line streaming article. We've got Johnny the Greek's cornerback article. We got Mike's ranks. We got defensive ranks. We literally have you covered across the board in all realms of IDP. So if you're not doing so, make sure you hit that notification button so you're made aware of everything that drops all week long. Join me next week, championship week. Like Pete said, hopefully you're still listening because you have a reason to, but we're bringing in a true IDP champion that we all know and love for the biggest week of the fantasy football season, Mr. John Macri from PFF, as we look to bring home the hardware this season. And so hopefully you didn't start Sam Darnold over Marcus Mariota and you still have a chance to play. But until then, for Pete and myself, we say thank you for joining us and best of luck to you and your teams in the semifinal week.
This was the IDP After Show.